Good evening. Welcome to The View Up Here. I am your host, Canadian Glenn, and it is July 31st, 2019. Tonight, along the federal election path, who are we rid of? Who will we miss? And no, the election date is not moving. I want to do a show about who won't be back, no matter what, and whether it's good or bad. And we'll talk about the decision on the election date. There's always a degree of changeover and attrition rate as every parliament ends and the election process gets rolling. History tells us that it's usual for the party in power to have fewer members of parliament decline to run for re-election than the opposition party. The exception being when the governing party knows the end is near, as in the Progressive Conservatives in 1993, when over 34% of their caucus saw the writing on the wall and did not try and get re-elected. But since the nomination processes of each party are at different stages, the numbers will continue to change as October 21st approaches. But the norms seem to be holding more or less. The governing Liberal Party of Canada is currently looking at a 14% attrition rate. The Conservatives sit at 23%, which is lower than 2015, when they had a 29% attrition rate. You know, like I said about they know the game's up. The New Democrats have an uncharacteristic 35% attrition rate for this fall's election. Now, the average rate for all parties since 2000 has been about 16% attrition. Well, who are we happy to be rid of? Who will we miss? Who was booted from a caucus? Who has passed away while in office? Who crossed the floor? Who lost their nominations for re-election? These are all factors in the attrition rate. Now, another issue is the costs related to quote-unquote severance pay for members of parliament who choose not to run again, and those who will lose their re-election bids. Now, the costs are already adding up to nearly $2 million, but by the end of October, it could be many times that. Plus, anyone leaving or defeated with less than 6 years of service will get their pension contributions returned, plus interest. Not the part that we paid on a 10-to-1 basis, but what they paid. So it's not your average workplace, to put it mildly. Now we're going to try and take a look at the inherent real costs to the Canadian public. And did you know that the election date of October 21st came very close to being changed? A constitutional challenge based on religious rights was made, and Chief Electoral Officer Stéphane Perreault was forced to consider the change by the Federal Court of Canada. A big precedent has been set. Now we'll look at that decision. So I'm going to start with more or less, it's not as easy as you'd think to find up-to-the-minute accurate lists of who's not running again, who lost their nominations, etc., etc. It's not. So this is from July 15th. This is a pretty good summary, about one of the best I found out there, by Josh DeHaas, who's a freelancer. He's worked with Maclean's, CTV, Toronto Now, had stuff in the NatPo, lots of places. I'm sure I'm missing some, but thanks, Josh. Who's not running in 2019? I look at the many MPs leaving the House or their party. That's from July 15th. With just over 4 months until October's federal election, here's a look at the still growing list of MPs who are not running again, or at least not for the parties that helped them get elected in 2015. At least 18 MPs who were Liberals last summer won't be running again for the party this fall. The best known is Scott Bryson, the MP for Kings Hants in Nova Scotia, who quit his position as president of the Treasury Board in January. Bryson was first elected as a progressive conservative in 1997 and went on to spend 22 years in Parliament. During his farewell remarks in the House of Commons, Bryson said he was leaving with his head held high and in order to spend more time with his young family. Andrew Leslie, who served as a lieutenant general of the Canadian Forces before winning the Ottawa seat of Orleans in 2015, has said he won't run again. Selina César-Chavin, the outspoken representative from the Ontario riding of Whitby, announced her departure in March. César-Chavin was one of the first Liberals to publicly support Jody Wilson-Raybould after the Globe and Mail broke a story alleging the PMO pressured her when she was Attorney General to intervene in the criminal prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. César-Chavin said her decision to leave is for personal reasons. Jody Wilson-Raybould, Vancouver-Granville, was kicked out of the Liberal caucus along with former Cabinet Minister Jane Philpott. Markham Stouffville, Ontario. Both women will be running again, but as independents. 4 Nova Scotia Liberals, Bill Casey, Matt Eiking, Colin Fraser, and Roger Cuzner, have also said they're all calling it quits. Cuzner said in his farewell speech in the House, "I am not sad to go. I am just happy to have had the opportunity to be here." New Brunswick Liberal MP TJ Harvey announced he will not run for re-election after one term, citing his desire to return to work in the private sector. Also not running Ontario MPs Boris Wisniewski, John Oliver, and Don Rusnak. West Vancouver MP Pamela Goldsmith-Jones has also decided not to stand for re-election. In her farewell remarks in the House, she said, "It will not surprise members to know that I am deeply disturbed by the stultifying and soul-destroying House of Commons rules that stipulate that the House sit on Fridays every week, or until midnight, or all night long. This is not democratic. This is not even humane. We should all be here in the House of Commons as our best selves, energized, not sleep-deprived, optimistic, not frustrated." The Liberals have also lost Nicolas Diorio, who resigned from his Quebec seat last month after a long absence, and Ontario's Raj Grewal, who said he was resigning after a gambling scandal, but has decided to continue sitting as an independent. There are also Hunter Tutu and Darshan Kang. Both were elected as first-time Liberals in 2015 and were relegated to the independent benches after dealing with cases of misconduct. I will update. I believe Mr. Tutu has announced he will not seek re-election. Meanwhile, Leona Aleslev crossed the floor from the Liberals to the Conservatives. At least 15 people who were Conservative MPs last summer will not run again for the party this fall. Among the most high-profile veterans moving on are Ontario MPs Kelly Leach and Rob Nicholson. Leach served as minister responsible for the status of women under Stephen Harper. She famously proposed a values test for New Canadians when she ran for the party leadership. Nicholson held a number of cabinet roles under Harper, including Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Defense, and Justice and Attorney General. In Leach's last speech in the House, she said, "Even with my challenging experience during and following the leadership campaign, I will continue to talk about issues that matter to Canadians, like the ones they talk about every day at the dinner table and at Tim Hortons. This country and the responsibility we have as Canadians to help others, both here and abroad, is too important to me not to. Okay, Kelly, whatever. Tony Clement, who also served in cabinet under Harper, was kicked out of caucus last fall after a sexting scandal. He has said he will not run again as an independent in his riding of Parry Sound Muskoka. Larry Miller, the proclaimed keeper of the Conservative torch from Bruce Grey Owen Sound, is leaving after 28 years. Also retiring from the Conservatives' Ontario caucus are Guy Lazon, Bev Shipley, Dave Van Kesteren, David Tilson, and Alex Nuttall. Party's also losing Alberta MP Jim Eglinski, Saskatchewan's David Anderson, Manitoba's Robert Sopuk, and BC's Mark Warara, who has passed away from cancer. Maxime Bernier left the Conservatives after narrowly losing the leadership to flaccid Andy Scheer. He went on to start the People's Party of Canada. And fellow unsuccessful leadership candidate Brad Trost is not running again after he lost the nomination race in his riding. So far, the new Democratic Party is facing the biggest loss. 14 NDP members have decided not to run again, which is nearly one-third of their 44-member caucus. Well, that number has changed to 15, and they are over one-third. Ousted party leader Tom Mulcair resigned his Quebec seat in 2018, and the Liberals picked it up in June 2018's by-election. Kennedy Stewart left his seat in the fall of 2018 and became the mayor of Vancouver. Mulcair's successor as leader, Jagmeet Singh, helped the party keep the seat in a by-election in June. Sheila Malcolmson left her MP seat in October of 2018 and was later elected to the BC provincial legislature. At least 3 more NDP members from BC have announced their retirements. Nathan Cullen, Murray Rankin, who has his next job lined up, and Finn Donnelly. Cullen, in his farewell speech in the Commons, said, "I like the idea of farewell. The last number of weeks and months have been quite a strange experience for me. It has been a bit like being at my own funeral, actually. People come up to me and talk about how they feel about me, good and bad, and I get to hear comments that I think we do not share with each other nearly often enough. I do not want anyone to look back, but it has been so long. I actually had a full head of hair when I got here. I will ask that no one Google that." That is true. There was a time Nathan Cullen had hair. In addition to Mulcair, 4 more Quebec members are leaving. Romeo Saganash, Hélène Laverdière, Anne Mintu Kach, and Marjolaine Boutin-Sweet. Linda Duncan, the NDP's only member from Alberta, Edmonton Strathcona, is moving on after more than a decade. Duncan said in her farewell speech, "Among my fondest memories of an election win was dancing in a pub with the visiting Mexican soccer team, excited that a quote-unquote socialist had been elected for Alberta. As with my colleagues, I was the first NDP and the first woman elected in my riding, but I was also the first NDP elected in Alberta in 25 years, and then re-elected and re-elected again." That she was. Longtime Ontario MPs Irene Matheson and David Christopherson have also decided to give up their seats. Now, former NDP Member of Parliament Aaron Weir has also decided not to run again. After being removed from caucus over allegations of harassment, he became the sole representative of the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, the CCF. He said he's not running again because NDP leader Jagmeet Singh continues to block his candidacy. Indeed. So that's the overall thing. There are some very familiar names there, but like I said, that is the norm. It's just that once every 4 years, you got to think about it. I'm sure there'll be a lot more names that won't be returning after on October 22nd, but, it just changes, just the environment changes. This is a whole new parliament, so the names that are leaving, it's relevant. You don't really look at it long term. But as far as identifying a little more on the parties, this is from April 15th. So, this is going back a bit and describing the process a little bit. iPolitics' Charlie Pinkerton, Liberals slow in nominating candidates while losing MPs. So this is, like I said, mid-April. The governing Liberals' list of future candidates increased by only single digits during a month-and-a-half long period in which the party also lost 3 MPs from its ranks. According to an iPolitics assessment, the Liberal Party's 2019 team is currently made up of 169 candidates, up just 4 from when we last reported on March 5th. Since then, the Conservative Party has bolstered the lead it holds in nominated candidates, bringing its total at that time to 226. Greens had the third with 88, NDP had 58, and the Bloc Québécois had 15. Now, on March 5th, already this year, a good 6 months before the election, the Conservatives led all parties with 204 candidates already decided. The Liberals followed with 165, the Greens had 56, the NDP had 43, and the BQ had 12. Now, the Conservatives are the only party to have cracked the two-thirds mark, and this was in April already. David Bush, a party activist and lawyer, is the Conservative candidate that will run against Green Party leader Elizabeth May in her BC riding of Saanich Gulf Islands. Jay Shin, a corporate lawyer, is the party's candidate that will run against NDP leader Jagmeet Singh in his BC riding of Burnaby South. Richard Lahou, a former mayor and the former president of the Fédération Québécoise des Municipalités, will run against People's Party leader Maxime Bernier in his Quebec riding of Beauce. The Conservatives haven't yet nominated a candidate to run in the Quebec riding of Papineau against Prime Minister Trudeau. Now independent MPs, Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, were removed from the Liberal caucus after they resigned from cabinet amid the SNC-Lavalin affair. A spokesperson for the Liberal Party wouldn't say by what date the party expects to announce new candidates in Wilson-Raybould's BC riding of Vancouver-Granville and Philpott's Ontario riding of Markham-Stouffville. Both had been renominated for the Liberals before they were expelled from the caucus. Selina César-Chavannes also left the Liberal caucus amid the controversy, but had previously decided she would not be seeking re-election. The Liberals at this point in time, where this was in April, have not nominated candidates to run against Scheer, or May, or Bernier, or Singh. The Greens have nominated candidates to run against each of the other National Federal Party's leaders, except for Jagmeet Singh. Josiane Fortin will run in Beauce against Maxime Bernier. Juan Vasquez will run in Papineau against Trudeau, and Merodale Dewar will run in Regina Capel against Andrew Scheer. In the NDP, Marie Della-Mattia, the campaign co-chair of the NDP, downplayed the party's short candidate list when speaking to the Toronto Star at the end of March. Della-Mattia told the Star that the NDP takes longer to confirm candidates than other parties because of its rules that are designed to attract diverse candidates. The NDP has not nominated candidates to run against any of the other leaders yet. The Bloc Québécois has nominated at least 15, which now includes their leader Yves-François Blanchet. CBC reported that Blanchet would run in Beloeil-Chambly, which is currently held by NDP MP Matthew Dubé. There are 77 total federal ridings in Quebec. Last month, People's Party leader Maxime Bernier announced that his party would be accepting applications from hopeful candidates online until April 23rd, with candidate selection meetings to follow in the second week of May. Longtime Member of Parliament Tony Clement, announced earlier this month that he would not seek re-election. He served multiple roles in former Prime Minister Stephen Harper's cabinet and ran for leadership 2 years ago. Yeah, he also is still working for Harper. And at this point in time, when this was written in April, the last paragraph was the three other independents in the House, former Liberals Hunter Tutu, Darshan Kang, and Raj Goewal, have not indicated whether they plan to run in the election this fall. Well, that's been updated, and all three of them are out. Now, from March, the other announcement that was alluded to in that previous article, this is from the Canadian Press, it was in the Globe and Mail, Liberal MP Selina César-Chavin says she will not seek re-election. In a statement, the rookie MP said it was a personal decision based on a number of factors, and she informed Prime Minister Trudeau on February 12th, although her reasons arose before then. Over the course of the last 3.5 years, I had the opportunity to work with some fantastic colleagues, debate policy, put forward ideas, and shape tremendous pieces of legislation that will have a real and positive impact on families across the country. Outstanding boilerplate. It is an honor I never took for granted and will not soon forget. That is why this announcement is a tremendously difficult one for me to make. Now, she said her decision was not related to the SNC-Lavalin controversy. She said that she has tremendous respect for Ms. Wilson-Raybould, and this will never change. César-Chavin, who is black, has also been vocal on issues of race. In May 2018, she and then Conservative MP Maxime Bernier got into a Twitter dispute when Bernier accused César-Chavin of thinking the world revolves around her skin color. César-Chavin responded to Bernier by pointing out that she deals with policy on a daily basis. She said on Twitter in reply, "Unlike you, however, I can focus on policy while also shifting the status quo and increasing awareness." So, just each way, boilerplate. Now, that wasn't the first time the two had clashed online. In March of 2018, 2 months before that, César-Chavin apologized to Bernier on Twitter after telling him to check your privilege and be quiet in a heated discussion about funding for minority communities. Bernier did not seem open to the idea, telling César-Chavin he did not think the two could find much common ground. César-Chavin said that even though she will soon no longer be a member of Parliament, she hopes she inspired others to create change through political involvement. As I move on to different adventures and part ways with this role in politics, know that I will not be too far away. I will continue to push boundaries, dismantle the status quo, and break glass ceilings. And I hope you will expect no less from me. All right, well, ego is not a problem for Miss César-Chavin. Think she ever comes back to politics? Gee, I don't know. What do you think? Christy Kirkup, the Canadian Press. This is from July 30th, yesterday. This is confirmation. Former Cabinet Minister, Nunavut MP Hunter Tutu will not seek re-election. In a statement released Tuesday via social media, Tutu said that after much consideration, he has decided to leave politics entirely. I appreciate very much the encouragement and support I have received from Nunavummiut all across the territory over the past months. I have made the decision to leave public life. I will not be a candidate in the upcoming federal election. He called it an honor and a privilege to serve the people of Nunavut, first as a member of the Legislative Assembly and then as a member of Parliament. He served as a member of the territory's Legislative Assembly from 1993 to 2013, before campaigning and winning a seat in the House in 2015. During my time as a Member of Parliament, I contributed to positive change for Nunavut. Here we have consensus government, a group of elected individuals who work together to do the right thing for all the people of Nunavut. Coming from that work ethic, I was able to work with members of all political stripes, as well as my cabinet colleagues, and I am proud of the things I accomplished. Now, remember in 2015, Tutu garnered headlines after he defeated Conservative Cabinet Minister Leona Aglukkaq in the riding. He was named Fisheries Minister in Trudeau's first cabinet. Less than a year later, Tutu announced that he was quitting cabinet and the Liberal caucus as he apologized for a consensual but inappropriate relationship with an unidentified person. He took a 2-month hiatus to seek treatment for what he described as an alcohol addiction that he said took over his life and left his judgment clouded. Yesterday, Tuesday, Tutu thanked his family, friends, and parliamentary colleagues for helping him through a difficult period in his life. He also encouraged anyone who suffers from addictions, mental illness, or trauma to seek the help they need to heal. Not coincidentally, Leona Aglukkaq has announced her intention to take back what she says is her seat. Janice Dixon, Globe and Mail, going back to April 2nd. Longtime Member of Parliament Tony Clement said he's not seeking re-election. Longtime MP Tony Clement, who resigned from the Conservative caucus in the fall of 2018 after revealing he had inappropriate interactions with women, says he will not seek re-election. In a statement posted to his website, Mr. Clement wrote that after spending the past several months focusing on personal and family well-being and on his duties as a member of Parliament, he's decided not to run for election again. This was actually not a difficult decision, and it is also the right one. Well, I have to agree with you there, Tony. I am very content with it, as is my family. It's time to move on. Yeah, it's time to get the fuck out of Dodge. My personal life is back on track after the personal crisis I created, and that better lived life will continue. The Ontario MP resigned from the Conservative caucus in November of 2018 after saying that he became the victim of financial extortion after sharing sexually explicit images and a video with someone he thought was a consenting woman, but was actually individuals who targeted him. Days later, Mr. Clement revealed additional inappropriate interactions with women and said that acts of infidelity had exposed him to blackmail. Mr. Clement had said that the RCMP were investigating the original incident of extortion, and in January of 2019, RCMP confirmed that 2 men in Côte d'Ivoire, in Africa, were charged with connection to the blackmail case. On the day he made the announcement, Mr. Clement said he wanted to thank those who have offered their prayers, encouragement, and support throughout the last few months. Politics has changed so much since I was first elected in 1995 to the Ontario legislature. Anyone who enters this life faces loneliness, anxieties, and adversity, but also triumph and a feeling of accomplishing something important. Clement is a married father of 3 who has represented the Ontario federal riding of Parry Sound Muskoka since 2006. He served as a cabinet minister in Ontario and in former Prime Minister Stephen Harper's government, and he ran for party leader, both federally and provincially. He wrote that he's still a conservative, and he will be supporting the Conservative Party in the upcoming election. See how many requests you get to come out and stand with who they actually want to get elected in Ontario. Tony, actually go to Vaughan. Tony, go to Vaughan. Go to Woodbridge. Support the CPC candidate there, please. Please. Christian Paz Lang, Canadian Press. This was posted at the National Observer. This is from June 27th. With a third of 2015 MPs not running, NDP turnover highest in at least 20 years. When the federal election campaign gets underway in earnest, parties will be missing dozens of incumbent MPs who have opted against running again, including 11 sitting NDP MPs. The party is suffering the highest attrition rate of any with official status in the last 6 elections, going back to before 2000. Combined with MPs the New Democrats have shed over the past 4 years, a total of 15 members elected in 2015 will not be carrying the orange banner into the 2019 election campaign. That's more than 1/3 of the original caucus. Now, those numbers include any MPs who were elected in one election but did not run for the party in the next. It does not include MPs who died in office, as this is meant to reflect changes in the caucus that are likely to have been politically motivated, not other factors. Now, for the NDP, the rate encompasses 11 sitting MPs not running again, 3 who have resigned, and 1, Saskatchewan's Aaron Weir, who was expelled from caucus. This is the article where I got the percentages from. Liberals have lost just more than 14%, and this information's a month old. Conservatives sit at 23%, but the NDP, 34%. In all, 68 members of parliament who were elected in 2015 for parties with official status have said they will not run for those groups or have been barred from doing so in 2019. 5 of those MPs died in office, of which 4 are not included in the attrition rates. 3 were conservatives and 2 were liberals. Mark Warawa had announced he was not running prior to his cancer diagnosis and is included in the attrition rate. The NDP's attrition rate before this election is an outlier for the party. Its average across previous elections is the lowest of any party at 14%, and its rates have spiked only since its massive gains in 2011. In an emailed statement, the NDP said there are probably as many reasons as there are individuals for why MPs are not running again, expressing confidence in the candidates that have risen to fill the places of departing MPs. Now, Carl Belanger, a former national director of the party and an aide to former leaders Mulcair and Layton, said many of the departures were unsurprising, as those veterans needed to be persuaded to run in 2015. So some of the retirements were a long time coming. He also said, obviously, it is easier to convince people to run for you and run again for your party if you're high in the polls, which is not the case right now. Belanger also said some of these veterans who have been around a long time in the same roles as opposition MPs were convinced that they perhaps had a shot of power at becoming a cabinet minister. Doesn't seem to be in the cards anymore. Belanger said the high turnover is an opportunity to bring fresh blood into the party and recruit star candidates in ridings that remain strong bets for the NDP. Chris Alcantara, a political science professor at Western University, says that another reason incumbents might choose to call it quits is that they're just tired of public life itself. Especially now with Twitter and social media, there's more public scrutiny today than in previous years. People get tired of that and the stress on their families. Now, higher turnover means fewer incumbents, who do tend to have an advantage in Canadian politics. One study by Simon Fraser and UBC found incumbent MPs are roughly 10% more likely to win their races. Rookie candidates are also more likely to make mistakes or have less connection to their ridings than incumbents. Generally, it's better for a party to retain its experienced MPs, but overarching themes like a change narrative and the overall popularity of the party are more important in determining their electoral fates. That complicates the connection between attrition and election outcomes. And the two could be correlated, but not have any real causal effects on the other. Over the past 20 years, 9 caucuses have had attrition rates above the average, and 6 of them lost seats in the following elections. Conversely, 13 have had below average rates, and just 4 of them lost seats. Think about that when you think about the Liberal Party. Prior to the last election, Bloomberg News found just one instance in Canadian history where the attrition rate for a party exceeded the NDP's current figure. And that was when over 40% of progressive conservatives elected in 1988 did not run before their party's catastrophic defeat in 1993. Now, what about the money? You know, it's not just like, yeah, I quit, I'm going home. Everybody has lovely parting gifts, without a doubt, some better than others. But we have lovely parting gifts for everyone. Don't you worry. Even staffers, some of them. Okay, National Post, July 9th. Some MPs not running in the next election will get paid around $1.6 million in severance. This is again Christian Paz line. Members of Parliament who have decided not to run for re-election this fall will cash in a cumulative $1.6 million in severance payments, and millions more will likely be paid out after the election. 39 sitting MPs have declared they won't run again in the next election, of whom 18 are eligible for severance payments, totaling an estimated $1,618,850, according to an analysis by the Canadian Press. Sitting MPs who have served for less than 6 years are not eligible for pension and instead receive a lump severance payment worth half their annual salary. They also get back any pension contributions they've already made plus interest. Another thing about the pension and their interest rates, you know, how people talk about how their hedge funds or whatever, you know, the return, the rate of return is down. Well, the funny thing about the parliamentary pension plan, they decide what their interest rate is by an act of parliament. Don't you wish you could do that? Anyway, members who have served for more than 6 years but are under 55 years of age and thus not immediately eligible for pensions will have that pension deferred and can take severance pay at a rate similar to their rookie colleagues. Now, the standard salary for MPs currently sits at $178,900 for 2019, meaning most sitting MPs receiving severance will walk away with just under $90,000, money that gets paid even when they choose not to run. Some MPs who hold higher offices are eligible for more money. The retiring Liberal MP Pamela Goldsmith-Jones, for example, is a parliamentary secretary and should receive about an additional $9,000. Now, the total doesn't include 3 independents, former Liberals Hunter Tutu, Darshan Kang, and Raj Goyal, who have not announced whether they will run again. Each would receive $89,450 if they do not run again, which would put it over $2 million. Okay, well, that has happened. All 3 of them have said they're not running. They're taking their $90K, and we'll see you later. The amount of money set to be paid out to retiring MPs is just a first wave. The total is set to skyrocket after the election, when MPs who lose their races and are not eligible for pensions will also get golden handshakes. It's difficult to calculate exactly how much will be paid out in October, since it depends how many MPs who have served less than 6 years or MPs younger than 55 years old are defeated. But the average severance payment will likely be higher than for the MPs who definitely are not running. That's because most MPs already set to receive severance are backbenchers, while those defeated in the coming election may include cabinet ministers and others with boosted pay because they have additional duties. There are 24 cabinet ministers out of 35 total, including Trudeau, so 24 out of 35 in cabinet, are rookie MPs and will be eligible for $132,200 in severance if they lose on October 21st. After the 2015 election, dubious source, but still, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation estimated a total of $11 million in severance payments had been paid out to retiring or defeated MPs. Employees of members of Parliament get a guaranteed 2 weeks' worth of severance for their first year of work and 1 week for each subsequent year, to a maximum of 28 weeks. If an MP serves 4 years and retires with a severance payment, he or she would receive around 8 weeks' pay for every year worked. Duff Conacher of Democracy Watch, an ethics watchdog, said MPs should put the whole package of compensation to an independent commission, and that group should determine the severance payment for MPs by comparing it to similar jobs outside of politics. He also suggested different MPs might get different packages. A minister, who is more likely to be able to find lucrative work after politics, might receive less severance, not more. I agree with you, Duff. Different levels of severance could be determined based on factors like seniority or the relative safety of an MP's seat, which, though difficult to calculate, would be better than a blanket rule that is currently already generous. Conacher said, some MPs might genuinely need the money to tide them over until they find new work. But if you're in a safe riding, you have a lot of job security. Notice how there wasn't anything changed through C-76 on elections or through anything for the way the Parliament pays themselves that concerns money. They might change rates, they might change tenure requirements, age minimums, but there's always money. I mean, come on. This is where we are. You kidding me? Of course there's money. What are the factors for how many MPs are going to get the bump this time who've been around? As I said, who are we going to miss? Well, we already know the people who aren't running again. Some of them, kind of miss them. Some of them definitely ain't going to miss them at all. Glad to be rid of them. But Hill Times, Abbas Rana, June 24th, MPs who won by less than 5% margin in 2015 are in real jeopardy, says Ipsos. Now, the Liberals are heading into the October election holding only a 7-seat majority. And one pollster says ridings carried by less than a 5% margin are in real jeopardy. And those won by about 5% will be tight races. This is from Daryl Bricker, president of Ipsos. Now, the House adjourned. With MPs back in the ridings, the campaign will go into full swing in the coming weeks, even though these are the summer months. This is chiefly because polls for months have been predicting a tight race between the Liberals and the Conservatives. Up until recently, almost all polls have been showing the Liberals behind the Conservatives, with some showing a single-digit margin and others a double-digit margin. But now Liberal support seems to have started to rebound back, and it's becoming a deadlocked race. A 3-day rolling poll by Ecos Research released, well, if they say last week, that would be released mid-June, suggested that the Conservatives had the support of 33.6%, followed by the Liberals with 30.9%. The Green Party was 13.6%, the NDP 11.9%, and People's Party of Canada 4%. The poll also suggested that regionally, the Conservatives were leading in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. The Liberals were ahead in Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada. In Ontario, which has 121 seats, more than a third of the House of Commons, the Liberals were ahead of the Conservatives by 10 points. In Quebec, with 75 seats, the Liberals were ahead of the Conservatives by only 2 points. and 5 points ahead of the Conservatives in Atlantic Canada. But on the other side, the Conservatives were leading the Liberals in BC by 10, by 48% in Alberta, 42% in Saskatchewan, and by 18% in Manitoba. Now, prior to every federal election, all federal parties' senior organizers put together a list of their targeted ridings, where they believe they can make gains, or the held ridings that they are at risk of losing. The organizers take a number of factors into consideration for this list, including the most recent detailed internal regional polls, the amount of money in the bank for each riding, the quality of the candidate, how active local candidates are in their communities, and how hard a local riding campaign team is working. Now, according to former Liberal Member of Parliament Joe Jordan, these target riding lists keep on evolving, even after the writ will be dropped, depending on the political situation and the ever-changing polling numbers. Sharing his own experience from the 2004 election, he said the riding of Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes in Ontario that he represented from 1997 to 2004 was on the vulnerable list at the start of the campaign. But with the changing polling numbers, the riding moved to the write-off category, which meant that the party gave up on the riding and left Jordan on his own. Mr. Jordan said that then Prime Minister Paul Martin was supposed to make an appearance in his riding, but didn't show up because the polling numbers changed and the party focused on other ridings they thought they had a better chance of winning. Now, recounting his experience with a laugh, he said he doesn't hold it against the then top Liberal campaign officials because they have to make hard decisions based on the political situation at that time and have to allocate scarce resources. Jordan said, I started off vulnerable in 2004 and very quickly was moved into the write-off column. Now, he won in 2000 by only 55 votes. Then a bunch of my colleagues' ridings became vulnerable. That's not a criticism. I wouldn't have sent Mr. Martin there either. The party has to make a judgment call about where's the best use of very limited resources. Now, by the end of 2004 election, the Liberals were reduced from a majority to a minority government. So at adjournment, never mind who was elected, at adjournment, the Liberals had 177 seats. The Conservatives 96, the NDP 41, the Green Party 2, PPC 1, 7 independents, and 3 vacancies. Now remember, 177, they won 184 seats. The Conservatives won 99. The NDP won 44. Everybody dropped. Well, and then all of a sudden we got 7 independents. But in 2015, 70 ridings were decided by a razor-thin margin of 5% or less. Now, of them, the Liberals won 34. The NDP won 16, the Conservatives won 15, and the Bloc Québécois won 5. Now, geographically, 28 of that 70 are in Ontario, 22 in Quebec, 4 in Alberta, 9 in BC, 3 in Manitoba, 2 in Saskatchewan, and 1 each in New Brunswick and Newfoundland and Labrador. Now, among the 34 Liberals who won those close contests, 4 are cabinet ministers who were elected for the first time in 2015. They include Jean-Yves Duclos, Karina Gould, Catherine McKenna, and Amarjeet Sohi. Now, Duclos won his riding of Ville de Québec by 1.9%. Karina Gould won Burlington by 3.5%. McKenna won Ottawa Centre by 4.1%. And Amarjeet Sohi won Edmonton Mill Woods by 0.2%. Now, since the last election, the political situation has shifted back and forth in different provinces a number of times. The Liberals carried all 32 ridings in the 4 Atlantic provinces, but about 2 years later, the Liberal Party's polling numbers started to go down, which continued on for months until recently. Now, last week's ECOS poll showed that the Liberals have a 5-point lead over the Conservatives, with 37 versus 32, respectively. So how much more will these numbers change by the time we get to the election? Another example is Alberta, where the Liberals won 4 seats, 2 in Calgary and 2 in Edmonton, in the last election. Given the recent polling numbers showing the Conservatives holding a whopping lead over the Liberals, it remains to be seen how many seats the governing party will be able to win there this fall. In 2017, Darshan Kang from Calgary Skyview, who was elected as a Liberal, resigned from caucus after facing allegations of sexual harassment from one of his constituency office staffers. A subsequent investigation substantiated some of the allegations. Mr. Kang, who had carried his riding by a margin of 6.1%, is not seeking re-election. The other 3 Alberta Liberal MPs won their ridings by small margins. Liberal MP Kent Hare, 1.2%, Calgary Centre. Liberal MP Randy Boissonneau, Edmonton Centre, 2.2%. And of course, as we said, Amarjeet Sohi, 0.2%. Given the close margins of victory and the level of the party's support, it remains to be seen if Liberals will be able to carry any of these ridings. Meanwhile, Mr. Jordan told the Hill Times that ridings decided by a margin of 5% or less will be the ridings to watch, as they are going to be the places where most of the political action will take place. If the numbers do not change significantly by election time, it appears that the next government will be a minority, and these ridings could prove to be the difference. If there is a strong minority or a majority for anybody, these ridings are the battleground. How they play out in the ground, what kind of organization the parties put in there to identify and deliver the votes, that's what this is all about. Now, pollster Lorne Bozinoff of Forum Research agreed. The ones that were really close last time and or are projected to be close based on the current polls, it's a small subset. That's where all the action is going to be. He said that the party leaders' national tours provide a clear indication during the course of the campaign as to which ridings are being targeted by each party. Mr. Bozinoff said that if the leaders go to the ridings they already hold, it is a sign that their party polling shows they're in trouble there. If they go to ridings held by other parties, it means they seek to see an opportunity to make gains. So 70 ridings were 5% or less in 2015, and the Liberals have almost half of them with 32. June 30th, month-old, Bruce Campion Smith. This is from the Ottawa Bureau, the Toronto Star. And they're off. The federal elections pre-campaign period has officially begun. The Canada Day weekend marks more than the start of what seems like an overdue summer. It's the election warm-up, and in the eyes of Elections Canada, the official beginning of the pre-campaign period that imposes new spending restrictions on activities by political parties and registered third parties. With the federal election slated for October 21st, the coming weeks offer political parties a chance to road test themes and messages with voters, hone tour logistics, get election teams in place, and staff up war rooms before the campaign begins in earnest after Labor Day. And if you live in the Greater Toronto area, expect plenty of visits by party leaders. More and more people are paying attention as we get closer to the election, so that certainly matters, although it is the lazy, hazy days of summer. That quote is from Hamish Marshall, National Campaign Manager of the Conservative Party. Andrew Scheer, who took over the party's leadership in 2017, kicked off his election introduction to voters with 5 keynote speeches throughout the spring to sketch out his vision on the economy, the environment, foreign policy and defense, and confederation. In the weeks ahead, the Conservative leader will take those ideas on the road, Marshall told The Star in an interview. Get a load of this. We're going to continue to showcase Andrew Scheer and his positive conservative vision. Mr. Scheer is going to be touring the country and getting to know as many Canadians as possible between now and when the election starts. The Conservatives, who lead the other parties, with 308 candidates nominated, 94 of them women, have been actively campaigning in ridings across the country, knocking on $1.6 million so far this year to meet voters, according to Marshall. Jagmeet Singh, former deputy leader of the Ontario NDP, is the newcomer to the federal stage. He won the leadership of the federal NDP in 2017, but only took a seat in the Commons earlier this year after winning a by-election in Burnaby South. His summer to-do list is to get better known by voters nationwide. He's out there talking to people. They are still getting to know him. He'll also be doing a lot of work to prepare for the campaign since it will be his first, said Jennifer Howard, Singh's chief of staff, who will serve as campaign director. I think the summer mainly is a time of preparation and planning because I think those things are keys to any successful campaign, said Howard, who is a former Manitoba NDP cabinet minister. Now, the New Democrats made the strategic decision to release their entire campaign platform in June, months ahead of Election Day. That gives Singh and NDP candidates, 109 nominated so far, 56 of them women, more opportunities to talk up their campaign vows. But it's also a tacit acknowledgement that platform details can get lost in the hurly-burly of a campaign. We want to make sure that our candidates who are going to spend their summer out there talking to voters and listening to their concerns have a really solid basis of what we want to do if we're lucky enough to form government. We also know we need more time to make sure people hear that. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will also be on the road this summer, touting the government's record on job creation, child benefits, and the environment, said Liberal Party spokesperson Braden Cayley. We want to have conversations about that important progress that is being made for middle-class Canadians and hear from Canadians about their ideas. Justin Trudeau has been doing a number of events across the country in recent weeks, community events, open fundraising events, nomination events. He's going to keep doing that over the course of the summer. The Greater Toronto Area and the communities around it, which number more than 60 seats, promise to be a target of the summer politicking as candidates look to sway opinion in a region that could well decide the outcome on Election Day. The suburban seats around Toronto have been crucial to winning government for at least 20 years, if not more. I can see all the leaders in that area between now and Election Day. That quote is from Hamish Marshall. Now, Braden Cayley called Ontario an incredibly important focus for the Liberals and said the party hopes to capitalize on the overwhelming negative reaction to provincial Conservative budget cuts. There is probably nothing that we hear more about right now on the doorstep in Ontario. June 30th marks the official start of the pre-campaign season. That's when spending limits imposed by Bill C-76 kick in to cap spending in the period leading up to the campaign at $2 million for registered political parties and $1 million for a registered third party. Now, those spending limits cover the period between June 30th and the day before the writ is dropped. The election date is fixed for October 21st and will be called after the Labor Day weekend. But the party in power gets to decide exactly when the campaign, which must be between 36 and 50 days long, gets underway. For political parties, the restrictions cap how much they can spend on partisan ads. Anything that promotes or opposes a candidate or party named in an ad, according to Elections Canada. Registered third parties, people or groups that seek to influence the election, have their spending capped on a broader range of partisan activities, such as canvassing, getting out the vote, partisan advertising, as well as election surveys. Not subject to limits during this time are so-called issue ads that promote or oppose a particular issue but don't name a party or a candidate. There's more of these every election now. They are out there. And I think that unions are finding a very good niche with this, because with their messaging, they don't have to tell you what party they think sucks. Just listen to what they're saying. And that can work the other way as well. I'm sure we will see that. The Conservatives, who have consistently enjoyed a fundraising advantage over the other parties, say the spending restrictions unfairly punish parties that are good at fundraising. I think the cap was constructed to make up for the Liberal weakness on fundraising. There is no public policy reason for it, said Hamish Marshall. There's no public policy reason for it. We want Citizens United up here. We have more money. We should be able to spend more money. Money is power. In the first quarter of 2019, the Conservatives pulled in $8 million in contributions compared to $3.9 million for the Liberals and $1.2 million for the New Democrats. Again, Marshall, it gives an advantage to the Liberal Party, who is not doing as well fundraising, and more to the point, it doesn't have a similar restriction on ministerial travel. So they can still travel around the country using taxpayer dollars for the Prime Minister to do events and for cabinet ministers to tour around, all on the public dime. Well, of course, that's an assumption, and of course, it's what every fucking government's been doing since the beginning of time, which Harper was an expert at. So shut up. Braden Cayley said the new restrictions ensure that Canadians have a chance to hear the different ideas from political parties and their supporters in their community on an appropriately even footing. Cayley views these changes as very positive steps to protect our democratic process. He said the rules also ensure that third parties are playing by some important rules about how they engage in the beginning of an election campaign. Per se, I would tend to agree with that. Now, two of the highest profile independent candidates that a Canadian federal election has seen in some time are in this election, both former Liberal cabinet ministers. But independents generally, most overwhelmingly, don't win. I have something here from Fatma Sayed, May 29th. This is in the National Observer. Why is it so hard for independent candidates to get elected to the House of Commons? Now, the last person to be elected to the House of Commons as an independent was, ironically, now Liberal MP for Nova Scotia, Bill Casey. In 2007, Casey, then a member of the Conservative Party, was expelled by Prime Minister Stephen Harper after he voted against the budget, claiming that it broke the Atlantic Accord with his province and Newfoundland and Labrador. He was re-elected as an independent in the 2008 election and sat as such until he resigned his seat in 2009 to accept another posting after undergoing surgery for cancer in 2008. His 2008 electoral race was full of barriers, Casey said in an interview. According to election laws, independent candidates have to start with zero monetary funds. Members affiliated with the party have access to party coffers. That puts independents at a disadvantage on signs, pamphlets, and advertising. And after the election, any money left over in an independent's campaign has to be put back into government coffers, as opposed to a party riding association, for example. Casey said the system is unfair. It is stacked against independents. Still, Casey won with 69% of the votes in 2008 as an independent. His Conservative opponent, who replaced him on the ballot, garnered a mere 9%. In the House of Commons, Casey sat with the opposition parties in a seat next to a Liberal backbencher named Justin Trudeau in 2008. On May 27th, former Liberal cabinet ministers Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott announced their intention to seemingly follow that trajectory. Wilson-Raybould said during her announcement at a small community center in Vancouver, "In this reality, there is less room for overt partisanship in our evolving democracy. As an independent, she would be truly free to take the guidance of the citizens of Vancouver Granville and to represent you. I will not have to try and convince myself that just because that's the way it has always been done, means that it must continue to be done that way. Please don't get me wrong, I take great pride in what we have accomplished over the last 4 years. Many important initiatives were advanced, both locally and nationally. But I wonder what more could have been accomplished on big issues, the big issues of our time, if it was a less partisan environment. Simultaneously announcing her own decision across the country, Jane Philpott struck a similar note at a small farmers market outside of Toronto. She said, "We are getting really tired of hyper-partisan politics. Can't we get beyond partisan politics? The system seems dysfunctional. It seems like all they're doing up there in Ottawa is fighting with each other, and there's a disconnect. We don't feel like the people in Ottawa are connected to us, the people." This is what Philpott says her workers have been hearing on doorsteps. Philpott herself said, "Party politics is a big part of the disconnect and the dysfunction." Well, I'll have to go along with that. I've been saying that for quite a while. However, I don't believe these two independent candidates arrived at this epiphanous moment by accident after being quite safe in cabinet of government and then getting kicked out. Yeah, I could tell how that wasn't working out for you. Their goal is to shake the core of the central party authority that forms the basis of Canada's parliamentary system has raised concern from political experts across the country who are now watching their races closely. All agree that there is, in fact, too much power in the party structure of federal politics, and hyperpartisanship has limited progress on the big issues of modern times. Now, Patty Collinette is a former political official in Jean Chrétien's Liberal government. We're seeing issues like the climate emergency requiring nonpartisan agreement and behaviors. I think there's a dawning realization in our population that maybe our partisan fighting isn't getting us solutions. And that's one of the reasons why we all have concerns about the status quo. Political parties are preventing us from nonpartisan collaboration. Have to agree with that. But the question remains, how do you change a centuries-old political system effectively? Donald Savoy is a politics professor at the University of Moncton. He says, "Do you fix it by being two lone voices yelling in the wilderness? Or do you fix it by being part of a party and changing it from within?" The fact is, independent voices do not have much of an impact in our system. Canada has not had a strong independent movement since Confederation, when there were several independent politicians in government. They were called loose fish and operated separately of political structures, explains John English, director of the Bill Graham Center for Contemporary International History at Trinity College. When the party system began to take hold at the turn of the 20th century under Canada's first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, these loose fish declined in numbers. The party structure became the main source of funding for candidates and also provided patronage appointments to important positions, such as the railway or the post office. Independents made a brief resurgence in the Second World War, when Prime Minister Mackenzie King broke his promise of conscription. Quebec Liberals declared themselves independent. By the 1960s, independence became especially rare in Canadian politics, limited only to those candidates who got kicked out of their party or decided their interests didn't ally with party values or the party leader. The debate over the strength and influence of central party power in politics is not new either. Collinette says this discussion has been occurring within parties for years, but the question now is larger because it's not contained in the party anymore. The problem is independents don't have power to affect that change unless they can be a bridge between all parties. That depends on the personalities at play. Bill Casey was a good example because he was able to easily cross party lines. In Casey's own words, "I've been a backbencher, a minister, an independent, but I've always been center-left. I've always found somewhere I fit." Now, Collinette says, if these two women, Wilson Raybould and Philpott, can make a breakthrough on this, it will be quite something. Unless there's a real change in the electorate, history does not suggest this will happen. A cynical interpretation would say Wilson-Raybould and Philpott are only questioning central party structure because they're on the losing end of someone using party discipline and party power. That came from, surprisingly, University of Calgary political science professor Melanie Thomas. Nobody benefiting from the system will say the system is failing. Now, in this context, Professor Savoy doesn't understand Wilson-Raybould and Philpott's decision. The number of people who fly solo in Canada's parliamentary system is not significant because it is riddled with limitations. Being an independent member of Parliament offers fewer opportunities to make impact, either in the House of Commons or for one's constituents, according to several political experts. You don't get placed on committees, you rarely speak in the House, and you sit by yourself. Casey explains that most of the work of an MP is done in party caucus to garner support and influence for causes from colleagues. Savoy said, "I was surprised. I would have thought it was in their interest to join a party. I would have thought the Green Party would have welcomed them with open arms, and they would have welcomed getting the support of a political party. I can understand why they left cabinet. I can understand why they were kicked out from caucus. What I do not understand is why they are running as independents." Now, we go back to Melanie Thomas. The main reason Canada doesn't have more independent politicians is because they don't win. Before campaign finance legislation changes were created in 1974, local electoral campaign officers would identify supporters and then get supporters to learn the name of the candidate. Now, voters are more likely to recognize party labels than individual names. No shit. Normally, we don't see more independents unless they are the most famous local person. They don't have the individual recognition to overpower party labels. Now, a good example, which I can attest to, former Alberta Member of Parliament Brent Rathgeber resigned from the Conservative caucus in 2013 and sat as an independent, and subsequently ran as an independent in the riding of St. Albert Edmonton in the 2015 federal election. He was defeated by the Conservative candidate, Oberst Michael Cooper. In his book, Irresponsible Government, The Decline of Parliamentary Democracy in Canada, which is a good book, Rathgeber notes the difficulties of running without a party structure. As a Conservative in 2011, he'd won 63.5% of the vote. Running as an independent in 2015, he finished a distant third with 19.7% of the vote. Now, David Moskrop, political scientist and the author of Too Dumb for Democracy, agrees that central party authority needs to be loosened, but worries about the trade-offs. First, it'll require a lot of cooperation from parties, civil service, staffers, leadership, and media. Moskrop says he doesn't think that's going to happen. Then you have to balance loosening party control while maintaining party cohesion. How do you do that? Joining a party is a trade-off between effectiveness and independence. You are effective deep inside the political machine, but far less independent. Now, Moskrop said it won't be as easy as Wilson-Raybould and Philpott describe to effect change in the political system. There won't be a "I am Spartacus" moment for independent candidates across the country. I don't think we should overestimate the impact they're going to have. For government to work in this country, you need some level of restraint and cooperation. Otherwise, it doesn't work. The question is, how do you strike the balance between independence and effectiveness? And I think we can adjust a little towards independence without upsetting the whole thing. There is one big exception to this discussion, Professor English says. Current polling data is predicting a minority government in this upcoming election. In this case, where 2 votes could matter most, then you have more power than any backbencher of a party. This happened in 2004, when former Canadian Alliance Member of Parliament, Chuck Cadman, from British Columbia, won re-election as an independent after losing a nomination race in his own riding. At the time, he was the only candidate not affiliated with a party and remained as such for his remaining political career, refusing several offers to rejoin the Conservatives. He was also the only independent in the then minority Liberal government, and thus held considerable power. On May 19, 2005, Cadman cast a deciding tie vote to save a minority Liberal government supported by the NDP that the Conservative Party at the time was trying to defeat to trigger an election. Reports surfaced later that showed the Harper Conservatives offered a $1 million life insurance policy to Cadman 2 days before the vote. Harper denied doing anything inappropriate, but it was clear that Cadman had a significant amount of influence since he was holding the balance of power in a minority government. Now, Professor English says Wilson-Raybould and Philpott would be blind not to see this kind of opportunity. The two women have already spoken of a de facto alliance with the Green Party and leader Elizabeth May, who said she offered Wilson-Raybould the leadership. Professor Savoy believes that after making much noise, the two women will be elected and then decide whether they want to join a party or not. This may be where it ends up. It's an uphill climb for sure, but there are possibilities for them at the end of the road that are tempting. Well, I would have to agree with that, but I just don't think they're going to get elected. I'm really surprised to see Jane Philpott even run for re-election, period. I mean, I thought she would go back to her medical career. Or she seriously wants to start a change, regardless. You know, the odds are definitely against them both. I have a different personal opinion of both of these ladies, but if I was to pick one to win, my personal opinion would be Jane Philpott. But hey, whatever. So there's an awful lot of MPs that are just, no, I'm good, we're done. You know, it's strange. Like I mentioned before, Murray Rankin, he's got his next jobs lined up. Murray Rankin will become the first commissioner of NSIRA, the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency. Murray Rankin will be the first commissioner. And quite deservedly so. Murray Rankin is an outstanding international lawyer, very, very well experienced and versed in trade issues, in military issues, in rights issues on an international scale. I think his career as a barrister with the human rights cases he's been involved with, we could do a lot worse as the first basically equivalent of the DNI in the United States. I would say that is the parallel. The Director of National Intelligence in the U.S. gets to see everything. The Commissioner of NSIRA will get to see everything. Not in real time, per se. Those changes are coming as well. But he's got himself a good gig. I think it's a good call. And again, there's something that has to be noted. A lot of people say, who cares? It's not a big deal. This is the Trudeau government, a Liberal government, appointing a New Democratic MP to be the first commissioner to oversee our intelligence and security services. Could be a lot worse. Could be fucking Chuck Stroll. Could be Deborah Gray. CERC will be absorbed by NSIRA, by the way. We still have the issue with the Canadian Border Security Agency, but I'm sure if it's not a Conservative government, something will be done on that fairly soon. Now, what's this about the election date being moved? I thought there was very, very little coverage of this, and then once the federal court instructed the Commissioner of Elections to reconsider his decision, I thought it should have immediately been headline news, but no, not at all. I just want to cover it a bit because it's a big piece of precedence for Canada. Because if this would have gone the other way, I could see it cracking open a door for some serious fuckery down the road. So I'm glad it went the way it did. Now I'll go back to July 24th. Marco Vigliotti, iPolitics, federal court orders Election Canada to reconsider the election date. Now, the federal court on July 23rd ordered Chief Electoral Officer Stéphane Perreault to review his decision to not recommend to Cabinet, because they're the only ones who can change the date, that it move the election from October 21st, which falls on the Jewish holiday of Shemini Atzeret. During the holiday, observant Orthodox Jews must refrain from a wide range of activities, including campaigning and voting, as well as asking anyone to vote or campaign on their behalf. Also, 2 of the advanced polling days fall on Jewish holidays, restricting the ability of observant Orthodox Jewish candidates to participate in the campaign. In her ruling, Justice Anne Marie MacDonald said Perreault failed to address and balance the statutory obligations dictated in the fixed date election law that specified October 21st as the voting day, with the charter right violations claimed by 2 Orthodox Jewish complainants. Now, Perreault immediately said in the statement that Elections Canada would respect the ruling and he would make his final decision as soon as possible. Now, this ruling required Perreault to render his decision on whether to recommend a date change by August 1st. Cabinet ultimately has the final say over whether the date is changed, though the Chief Electoral Officer would be required to publish the date change they recommend in the Canada Gazette, under fixed election legislation brought in by the former Conservative government. That legislation mandates that the vote be held on the 3rd Monday of October, 4 years after the last election. The only alternate dates permitted in the law are the immediate Tuesday or the following Monday. Any date change must be made before August 1st, as per the fixed election law. Now, this case was brought forward by Orthodox Jewish candidate Chani Arya-Bain, who is running for the Conservatives in Eglinton Lawrence, and Orthodox Jewish political activist Ira Wolfish. They argue that holding the election on the Jewish holiday infringed on their equality rights stipulated in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This article says there are an estimated 75,000 Orthodox Jewish voters in Canada. After winning the Conservative nomination for the Toronto area riding, Arya-Bain wrote an email to Perreault asking for the vote to be moved to October 28th. She argued that holding the vote on the 21st and maintaining the existing advance poll dates specifically hurt her candidacy because 20% of voters in the riding are Jewish, including 5,000 Orthodox Jews. Arya-Bain, in her court submission, said Eglinton Lawrence is considered a very competitive riding that historically has a small margin of victory. Now, the riding is currently held by Liberal MP Marco Mendicino, who defeated the Tory incumbent, then Finance Minister Joe Oliver, in the 2015 election by 6.25%. This riding had been held exclusively by the Liberals since it was created in 1979 to 2011, when Oliver won. In that election, he defeated incumbent Joel Volpe by over 8 points. So it's not exactly a razor-thin riding, despite the statement. According to the court ruling, CIJA advised Perreault that the election date coincided with Shemini Atzeret and provided a list of Jewish high holidays during the expected campaign period. The CIJA joined Arya-Bain in asking Elections Canada in May to change the date to October 28th. Wolfish and some 140 other Canadians also wrote to Perreault expressing how the election date would impact the Orthodox Jewish community and suggested moving the vote from the 21st. Perreault, in letters to the CIJA and Arya-Bain, noted that Elections Canada doesn't choose the date of the election and has been working to ensure the election is as accessible as possible to electors who may not vote on Election Day in observance of Jewish holidays. He told CIJA on May 31st in response to another letter that he was not ready to make a recommendation to Cabinet this close to the start of the election, and argued the Jewish high holidays would fall within the election period whether the vote was held on October 21st or 28th. In another letter to a complainant, Perot said his decision not to recommend moving the day takes into account a wide range of operation matters, including availability of suitable polling places, employing field staff for another week in all 338 ridings, and extending contracts for services needed by Elections Canada for the additional week. Moving the vote to October 28th would also place it in conflict with municipal elections in Nunavut, as well as present challenges in securing accessible polling places for people with disabilities and recruiting qualified and capable election officials and staff. That was argued by lawyers for Elections Canada. Now, in cases of legal challenges of decisions of federal administrators, the federal court must determine whether there was an appropriate balancing of statutory obligations and constitutionally mandated protections. But in this case, Judge MacDonald wrote that there was no proof Perot even considered how to balance the charter complaints brought forward with his own obligations or the objectives dictated in the fixed date election law. Whereas here the record is silent on how the Chief Electoral Officer considered and balanced the charter issues, it is impossible for the court to determine if the balancing is appropriate. So that's why he got told to rethink. Well, that he did. July 29th. Here's the summary. This is from Jolson Lim and iPolitics. Elections Canada recommends keeping October 21st voting day over religious concerns. Canada's Chief Electoral Officer has recommended keeping the 2019 federal election date after calls were made to move voting day in order to accommodate Orthodox Jewish voters. Chief Electoral Officer Stéphane Perot said the decision was made with a view to providing the broadest possible range of accessible voting services to the population at large. I conclude that it would not be advisable to change the date of the election at this late stage. Now, the federal court ordered on July 23rd for Perot to review his previous decision. Now, Perot had been asked by members of the Jewish Orthodox community to recommend moving Election Day to October 28th, since the current October 21st conflicts with Shemini Atzeret. The holiday begins at sunset on October 20th and ends on October 21st. 2 days of advance polling also conflict with either the Sabbath or the festival of Sukkot. Perot wrote in his decision that he is committed to continuing to work with the Jewish community to maximize voting options within the existing calendar in ways that are convenient and consistent with their religious beliefs. He also wrote, "There is no such thing as a perfect election day, especially in a country as diverse as Canada. There are always Canadians who are unable to vote on election day." So, let's get to the specifics because, like I said in the opening, this is a top-flight document. This deserves to be the originating piece of case history for this issue. So this came out on July 29th. This is from Elections Canada. This is the decision of the Chief Electoral Officer. Now, the first part of it is explaining the case, and we're not going to bother going through that. Now, the Chief Electoral Officer, who the judge said didn't really show his work, well, here comes the work. The limitations on the charter rights of observant Jewish Canadians. Members of the Jewish community, including Ms. Arya Bain and Mr. Wallfish, have provided me with information on the impact of holding the election on October 21st on their religious rights and their ability to participate in the electoral process. Election Day coincides with the Jewish high holiday of Shemini Atzeret, which begins at sunset on October 20th and ends on October 21st. In addition, 2 of the advanced polling days conflict with either the Sabbath, which begins at sunset on October 11th and ends at sunset on October 12th, or the first day of the festival of Sukkot, which begins at sunset on Sunday, October 13th, and continues on the advanced polling day of Monday, October 14th. On these days, I understand that Jewish law prohibits observant Jews from taking part in many ordinary activities, including writing, driving, and working, and using any electronic devices, such as televisions, computers, and phones. This includes voting, volunteering, or otherwise participating in election campaigns. Mr. Wallfish writes that on Election Day, observant Jewish electors will not be able to participate in the election. He also writes that it will be difficult for observant Jews to engage in the electoral process the week before Election Day. I recognize that observant Jews will be precluded from voting at the polls on October 21st, and in addition, that many of them will be limited in their ability to participate in other activities through the election period owing to a conflict with the holidays. These dates also present unique challenges for observant Jewish candidates. I am informed and I recognize that Orthodox candidates will be limited in their ability to get out the vote on October 21st. Ms. Arya Bain writes that neither she nor her campaign will be able to engage with electors on Election Day. I understand that they will be prohibited from knocking on doors of potential supporters, contacting electors by phone, email, or text, and driving electors to polls who need assistance on that date. In addition, I understand that Orthodox Jews are prohibited from asking or encouraging anyone, even if they are not Jewish, from doing any work or any prohibited acts on their behalf on these holidays. I am aware of the practical impacts of this, as Orthodox Jewish candidates, therefore, will not be able to ask anyone to vote or campaign on their behalf on Shemini Atzeret, or ask anyone to act as a scrutineer to observe the voting process on their behalf at the polls. I do not question the sincerity of the religious beliefs that have been raised and the effect those beliefs have on the ability of observant Jews to participate in the general election, both as electors and candidates. I recognize that this situation engages their fundamental charter rights to freedom of religion, to equality, and to vote, and to be qualified for membership in the House of Commons. In forming my opinion as to the suitability of the election day, I must consider how the charter rights can best be protected in view of my statutory objectives. As Chief Electoral Officer, I am the head of Elections Canada, an independent, nonpartisan agency of Parliament. I exercise general direction and supervision over the conduct of elections, and I am authorized to exercise the powers and perform the duties and functions that are necessary for the administration of the Act. The fundamental goal of Elections Canada is to be ready to deliver fair and accessible federal elections whenever they may be called. The core of its mandate is to offer all Canadian citizens aged 18 and over the opportunity to exercise their democratic right to vote and be a candidate. More specifically, in the context of the issues in hand, my statutory duties include ensuring that voting services are provided at regular and advanced polls, that poll locations are accessible and proximate to electors, and that alternative voting options are available to those Canadians who are not able to vote in person at regular or advanced polls. Although some may have the impression that an election is just a one-day event, conducting a nationwide general election is a highly complex undertaking that involves years of planning. It requires employing a temporary workforce of 300,000, working in over 16,000 locations across Canada to serve 27 million Canadian electors. Many of these Canadians face a broad range of barriers that impact their ability to vote and or be a candidate. These barriers can be related to geography, language, disability, work, or family constraints. For some of these people, voting on Election Day is not an option. Part of the returning officer's responsibility is to know and engage with their local communities to alleviate barriers in the delivery of electoral services. One of my statutory objectives is to ensure accessible polling locations. According to Section 121 of the Elections Act. Polling stations must be located on premises that are accessible to electors with a disability. Now you see what he's doing here. He's laying out how complex his job really is. Preparations for the polling sites to be used in the 2019 election began in early 2018, based on the October 21st election date. They continued over the next 18 months in view of this date, although the fact that Election Day coincides with Shemini Atzeret was brought to my attention during this period. The information I received from members of the Jewish community in August 2018 and the following months was that the religious constraints faced by observant Jews would be adequately addressed through outreach and alternative voting options, and did not require a change in Election Day. Election Canada's preparations to date were made on that basis. This was consistent with our experience of the 2008 general election, when Election Day fell on the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, during which observant Jews could vote either by special ballot or on 2 of the 3 advanced polling days. After identifying polling sites in the fall of 2018, returning officers assigned polling divisions comprising an average of 350 to 450 electors, and which make up their ridings, to each suitable polling site and redrew the boundaries of the polling divisions when warranted by population changes. This exercise was to ensure that the distribution of polling locations in any riding was as close as possible to the distribution of electors, and in response in part to concerns that had been raised in the 2015 election. The extensive work done to identify polling sites and assign electors was based on experience of prior general elections. In the course of assessing the impacts of changing the election date to October 28th, field personnel had expressed very significant concern about the loss of polling sites and the impact that this would have on electors from the perspective of proximity, accessibility, and quality of service at the polls. At this point in the electoral calendar, polling divisions cannot be redrawn. With time running out, it is also likely that, faced with the loss of a facility, returning officers will resort to reassigning more polling divisions to an existing and still available facility. In urban areas, the reassignment of electors to other locations creates issues of overcrowding in lineups. In rural areas, field workers have indicated that in many cases, the only option would be to require electors to travel outside of their community to vote at polling stations in other towns or villages several kilometers away. So, you see, okay, you want to talk about rights? You want to talk about who has more rights than who? In exercising my discretion as to whether to recommend an alternative election day under Section 56, subsection 2 of the Election Act, I am directed by the Act to consider whether there is any conflict with a provincial or municipal election, in addition to any possible conflicts with days of cultural or religious significance. Nunavut's Municipal Council general election includes all 25 municipalities and is currently set by territorial legislation for October 28th. Although the October 28th conflict with the Nunavut municipal elections does not raise immediate charter concerns, I must nevertheless consider this information in exercising my discretion, as it forms part of Parliament's statutory scheme. Mr. Walfish writes that residents of Nunavut can vote in 2 elections in one day. However, elections taking place concurrently in 2 jurisdictions create competition for local resources, including election workers and sites, and possible voter confusion. The general practice of election administrators in Canada is to try to avoid competing elections wherever possible. Then the Chief Electoral Officer in his decision goes on to, in minute detail, explain the methods of voting that are available, and they are lengthy. Now we get to the section balancing the charter rights at issue against the statutory objectives, and this is exactly what the judge spoke about. One option that is open to me to protect the charter rights of observant Jewish electors and candidates is to recommend to the Governor and Council that the election date be changed to October 28th. However, the impact of a change of date at this stage in the electoral cycle on the right of all Canadians to a fair and accessible election weighs heavily in the balance. There is no such thing as a perfect election day, especially in a country as diverse as Canada. There are always Canadians who are unable to vote on election day. At the last election, some 4.3 million voters, which is over 25%, cast their ballot prior to election day, either at advance polls or through one of the various special ballot options. For most, this may well have been a matter of preference or convenience. For many, however, this was the only practical option. I recognize that maintaining October 21st as election day means that observant Jewish electors will have to vote in one of these alternative ways. They nevertheless have a genuine opportunity to participate in the electoral process. The Act provides considerable flexibility to tailor voting services in ways that assist electors who face challenges, especially where those electors are geographically centered and solutions adapted to the local circumstances, such as voting kiosks, can be developed. It is my opinion that Elections Canada can fulfill its mandate of ensuring a genuine opportunity for observant Jewish electors to participate in the electoral process by providing them with and informing them about the opportunities to vote ahead of Election Day. So basically what it came down to was the judge said, show your work. Well, he showed a whole lot of work. He said he fully understands that the Orthodox Jewish voter is disadvantaged on Election Day, on more than one advance polling day, but there is a flat-out commitment that Elections Canada will do anything that is asked of them. But the big part of the ruling is there are tens of millions of voters in Canada. We ain't changing the whole game for 75,000 voters. That's the correct decision. Sets a precedent. I'm glad to see it. I do believe that next week, August 7th, will be a two-parter. I believe I will be on Northumberland Community Radio with Dave Glover on the afternoon of the 7th, and in the evening of the 7th, Dave will be on The View Up Here. We will talk about the general political situation. I believe I will respond to some Alberta issues for his specifically Ontario audience, and it will be a more national picture here in the evening. So there's that show, and then there's the 14th, and then it's holiday time for The View Up Here. I have an interview to record to make the 14th a big show. That's it for tonight. Thank you for listening to The View Up Here. See you next time. Good night.